Rajesh, thank you for compiling all these photographs. Documenting.
That's beautiful, yes.
Very nice, you know. Documentation of all the work being done by IIRN is very, very important as well. So good.
Thank you.
He is very meticulous and proactive. Doesn't wait for someone to tell him. He just does.
Yes.
Things, and it is so beautiful the way he does.
Oh, we have Professor Johan. Welcome, sir. Even I had requested Dr. Anna. I had also requested Dr. Professor John Banks. She said that she would like many of her colleagues to join. I hope she got the message. Professor Richard, sir, it's now 29 participants we have, so already it's 7. Shall we go ahead?
Okay, yes, I think we'll start then. That's probably a good idea as well, trying to keep on time. So thank you very much, Rajesh. So can I just request that everybody make sure they switch their microphones off through this session so we don't get any background noise, so that we can proceed. So welcome everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be back here with you again today. The Indian Inclusion Research Network is going from strength to strength, largely because of the hard work of colleagues there in India, and Rajesh has been doing some sterling work, I know, over recent weeks, and this program's been going very well. So it's also good to be joined today by colleagues from outside India as well. My good friend, Professor Johan Malmqvist, I see has joined us from Sweden. So welcome, Johan. I hope all is well with you there in the frozen north. It's a particular pleasure to have Professor Garry Hornby with us today. I've known Garry for a number of years. We've worked together on a book, actually, and did some work together when I was in Hong Kong. And I remember various things about that trip, including Gary's particular passion for cakes, which kept us all very well fed in Hong Kong. I also recall Garry being here with Sarah, my wife, and I in Northamptonshire on the day that the earthquake struck Christchurch, and working with him to get in touch with friends and family there in Christchurch during the terrible time of the earthquake in New Zealand. But fortunately, Garry and family were all safe. But Garry has a very interesting background, having started working with children with emotional and intellectual difficulties in the UK as a residential social worker, and then in the USA. He's taught in England, taught physics and mathematics actually in England, before turning his attention towards children with special educational needs when he was in Auckland, New Zealand. It was also while he was in Auckland that he trained as an educational psychologist and set up training courses for teachers of visually impaired children, and worked also as a lecturer, and then later with Manchester University doing research, particularly in the area of Down syndrome, with a focus on parents for much of that work. He then joined Hull University in the remote east of England, where he was for a number of years and doing particularly good work, which gained a lot of national and international attention. Never one to settle anywhere for very long. Garry found that he liked the sunshine, so went to Barbados in the Caribbean, where he is today, and worked on teacher training and the development of research projects there as well. So Garry has very much dashed around the globe doing sterling work in the area of special and inclusive education. He's the author of many excellent journal articles, books and book chapters. I would certainly commend his work to you. It's freely available for people to read. So I think what I'm going to say nothing more about Garry, but hand over to him. But can I just remind everybody, please, switch off your microphones while Garry is doing his presentation. There will be time for questions and discussion at the end of his presentation. So thank you very much for being with us, Garry, and I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Richard. Oh, dear. Don't know how viewable I am today. Yes, looking forward to sharing these ideas with you. So now how do I get onto my share screen? Do I click on this?
Yes, sir. Now you can share it. The
Yeah.
green button is there, share screen.
I'm clicking it. But oh, I've got it now. I think, oh, has it come up now? There we are. I'm going back. I've got something I'm going to get rid of here. There we are. So that's the first screen. And the second one I wanted to share was harking back to my first of my visits to India with my wife. And we did a few of the tourist sites, but we also got around the country a bit, Bangalore, and later went down to Trivandrum, and then a subsequent visit, I think I did visit to Calcutta, and so mainly doing workshops on working with parents of kids with disabilities. So I have lovely memories. However, that was over 30 years ago, and in the last 30 years, there's been changes in the field of special education due to the presence of
the video is not on. We don't see any video.
Yeah, we can't see your presentation, Garry. Have you pressed the share screen?
I think he's still talking, not shared yet.
Yeah, I can see my screen, my PowerPoint screen. Can you not see it?
No.
Oh dear, what's happened there then? Go back. Yeah, so you can see me now.
Yep, see you, Garry, but can't see your presentation.
Okay, so I'm clicking on the green button for share screen. And then where's my share? But you see, it's not.
I think it's coming, Garry.
Where's your presentation?
I think it's.
This is it here.
We've got your laptop. We haven't got your presentation at the moment. We've got your desktop, rather. And then
has it come up now?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Oh, yeah. Brilliant. Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you. It's visible now. Thank you.
Thanks for letting me know.
Everybody
switch yeah, here we go now. So hang on. So slideshow from beginning. Yeah, so you can see that okay? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Then you can see the tourist photograph.
Yes, we can. Beautiful one.
Yes, of course, we both look exactly the same as we did 30 odd years ago. Not true, of course, but never mind. Okay, so back to work. Yeah, so over the last 30 years or so, there's been a great push towards full inclusion, mainly headed by United Nations and associated agencies. And what I'm going to present now is that I consider, along with colleagues I've been working with, that there are 3 myths about full inclusion that we need to be aware of. And because they've been quite influential in policy development, really all over the world. The first myth is that full inclusion was recommended by the Salamanca Conference, whereas it was not. Full inclusion was not recommended. I'll go into that. The second myth is that full inclusion has been shown to be a feasible approach in education systems such as Italy and the New Brunswick province of Canada, and it hasn't been shown to be feasible. And the third myth is that there's convincing research evidence that inclusive education is more effective than special education in achieving successful outcomes for young people with disabilities. There's not. And myself and Philippa Gordon-Gould this year have published a book on this issue where we go into great detail and provide all the theory and the research and the rationale for the current situation with regard to inclusive education worldwide. We look at about 16 different countries around the world and different attempts to implement in inclusion. So I'd recommend that book to you that's at the bottom of the screen now. So looking now at the three myths, I'm trying to make my case. Full inclusion was recommended by Salamanca. Well, the purpose of the International Treaty of Salamanca was to address the over 350 million children worldwide who are not in any forms of education. So it was an opportunity for governments to demonstrate they were really focusing on children's rights by supporting inclusion. So it got a bit confused, really. So it could be seen as expedient. Inclusion appeared to be a cheaper way of maintaining special education than maintaining special education infrastructure. The Salamanca Treaty has been used as a way to promote fully inclusive education by UNESCO and other bodies associated with the United Nations, as well as the European Agency for Special Needs and Disabilities. Whereas in actual fact, it talked about, the treaty talked about a majority of children with special needs being included in mainstream schools. So this reality, the reality of the situation in the world has been shown by the United Nations Global Education Monitoring Report in 2020, that most countries worldwide maintain a two-track education system. That's right, they have general education, which is in many cases trying to be more inclusive, but they also have separate special education. So the reality is not what is purported by the rhetoric on full inclusion. The United Nations Convention, now what's happened now is that the United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which has been signed by most countries in 2007 and ratified by countries including Barbados. And what happened is that this is first of all, it's the first binding international human rights agreement. And their aim is to promote, protect, ensure full and equal enjoyment of the rights and fundamental freedoms of all persons with disabilities. But then Article 24 was published in 2016, in particular, General Comment number 4, which claims that the rights, human rights of children with learning disabilities will be better fulfilled if they were included in mainstream classes. It claimed that this would be superior, provide them with a superior education than special education. And it didn't mention special education at all, just as if it didn't exist. So the myth from Salamanca that full inclusion was being supported was became part of the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities through Article 24, General Comment number 4, which is quite extreme in its views, which suggests that countries should really get rid of their special education systems. But in practice, experiences of nations around the world have been that it's very difficult or impossible to achieve this. And despite this, full inclusion without any special education remains the policy that is being imposed on countries by the United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So the second myth is that full inclusion is a feasible approach to education. And United Nations documents present New Brunswick in Canada, as well as Italy, as models for inclusive education. In New Brunswick, they attempt to involve all children with special needs in mainstream classes. However, the effectiveness of this model has never been objectively evaluated, even though it's been going for over 30 years. But if you look on Google, if you look it up on Google, you find that reports from teachers, parents, education officials, even the Minister of Education are very critical of it. They're saying that it really isn't meeting the needs of kids. So it's not a successful policy according to many people. Maybe it's being pushed because New Brunswick is a very sparsely populated area, so it's very difficult to provide special ed facilities. Other Canadian provinces, in fact, all the other Canadian provinces have not adopted the New Brunswick model. They still have special schools and special classes. So we need to be aware that New Brunswick is not, does not show that it's feasible to have a full inclusion approach. So for me, it's an example of inclusion philosophy taken to its illogical conclusion, to the detriment of all children with and without special needs. And James Kaufman, Professor James Kaufman in the States, and I just published a article on this, which is open access, and it's called Special Education Zombies and Their Consequences. It's open access, so if you put the title or part of the title into Google, you'll be able to read that article for free. And that article goes through the 3 myths that I'm talking about here. So that's one that's, I commend to you that article. The third myth is that convincing research evidence that inclusive education is more effective than special education. Such claims usually cite studies and reviews of studies with serious flaws in research methodology. And, you know, since it's unethical to conduct randomized control trials of inclusion versus special education, it's impossible to have convincing evidence. And several reviews of the literature over the past 30 years have concluded that there's no consistent evidence for the advantage of either special education or inclusive education. And we provide those references in that Zombies article that I just mentioned. Whereas over the past 20 years, several studies have found that special education interventions can be effective in improving the outcomes of young people with special needs. For example, I commend to you this article published in a journal called Education Sciences, which again is open. It's an open access journal, so you only need to put the part of the title in there and you can read that. And that gives an example of that shows that special education interventions can be more effective than inclusive education options. So looking at around the world, policies for effective education of children with special needs and disabilities, if we look at 3 countries, I'll look at New Zealand, Barbados, and Finland, just as examples of ones that I'm aware of. This shows that excellent outcomes result when education systems use the most effective strategies from both special education and inclusive education. For example, in New Zealand, the education system has focused mainly on promoting inclusive education while depleting special education provision. Special education schools and special classes like the ones that I taught in the 1970s for children with moderate learning disabilities or moderate learning difficulties, they've been closed down. And this is real. And in that time, so the provision for these children with intellectual disabilities in New Zealand has been reduced. And at the same time, the educational outcomes have declined on the PISA tests because it does not, it's been shown that there's recent research by my colleague Anastasio that where countries have very well developed special education systems, they tend to have higher levels of reading. Kids with, you know, achieving good outcomes in reading. So overall educational outcomes are linked to having solid special education provision. Here in Barbados, we have a system we are hoping to change, where excellence for a relatively minority of children. No doubt we produce some excellent academic scholars, but the majority experience underachievement because our system is focused entirely on promoting excellence for a minority. We're currently trying to reform that education system, and by getting rid of the selective secondary school transfer system of having an 11+ exam like we got from England years ago. So we're currently trying to get rid of that, but at the moment, it really is, we really have a huge problem with the majority, over 70% of children leaving secondary schools with no qualifications whatsoever. So that's doesn't work. Whereas in Finland, we have a comprehensive education system which incorporates high quality provision for special needs education, as well as high quality teaching in the general system, which leads to it being one of the best education systems in the world. So my conclusion is that education systems are most effective when they combine special education and inclusive education. And I refer there to the book that Philippa Gordon-Gould and I just published this year that was referenced earlier and at the end. I'll give all the references at the end as well. So the way forward then, what am I suggesting? The way forward, I would conclude that after many years of unsuccessful attempts to establish an idealistic vision of full inclusion in education systems in different parts of the world, the full inclusion movement has come to a final crossroads. Decision needs to be made. You know, seems very unwise to carry on promoting full inclusion when it's clearly not being implemented in most countries of the world, and countries that do implement it find there's real difficulties with it. So this come about through a realization of the impossibility of effectively educating the numbers, the diversity, and the complexity of children with very special needs who would all be in mainstream classrooms if a full inclusion system were to be implemented. So to continue this, promote this failed agenda will inevitably diminish educational provision for young people with disabilities and without disabilities. So it's suggested that the best way forward is through integrating aspects of inclusive education with aspects of special education by using what I've called inclusive special education. So inclusive special education involves, rather than having either inclusion or special education, both inclusive education and special education are necessary in order to get optimal outcomes for students with disabilities and other students. Education systems should implement policies that combine the philosophy and values of inclusive education with strategies, interventions, and programs from special education, so they are both equitable and excellent for all learners with disabilities and, in fact, all other learners. The inclusive special education involves a recognition that young people with disabilities can be provided for appropriately within education systems that combine effective mainstream schools with high quality special education provision. And I refer to my two books, to my one book, 2014, and article 2015 on inclusive special education, which are details of that given right at the end of this presentation. So inclusive special education considers that although most children can be educated in mainstream classrooms, a relatively small number benefit more by being taught in special classes within mainstream schools or being educated at special schools. So I can't see the end. Mainstream schools need to work closely with special schools to help with the provision of support, provide sufficient of support for milder degrees of special needs, while special schools provide education for children with more severe levels of disability. And this is the policy in the state of Victoria in Australia, which I visited a few years ago, spoke at a conference there. And there the policy is that they want collaboration between special educators and mainstream educators. The special educators have a role of supporting mainstream schools in developing provision for children with milder degrees of special education, as well as providing in their own schools and classes for children with more severe levels of disability. And that, to me, is the model we need to have. We need to focus on the whole spectrum of special needs, which is provided for within mainstream schools and special ed facilities. So when inclusive special ed is implemented, mainstream schools are organized to provide effectively for a wide range of children with special needs by using programs and strategies that are evidence-based and have been shown to be the best practices for supporting the education of all learners. And I collaborated with Debbie Greaves in Atlanta, Georgia, looking at a book on evidence-based strategies that can be used in schools, where there's now a tremendous amount of evidence on which strategies work and are more effective for all children. And we're talking about cooperative learning, peer tutoring, formative assessment, parental involvement. So we have all that knowledge of the strategies that work. And I gave the reference for that book at the end. This is what we need to be focused on, using the strategies that are evidence-based rather than looking at a philosophy or a policy that is theoretically based. Inclusive special education requires a commitment to provide excellent education for all children with disabilities in the most appropriate setting for the individual throughout their education. So children may move, they may be in a special group in a kindergarten before they go to school. Then they may go to a mainstream class in a mainstream school with support for a while. And then as they get older, they may need to be in a special class or special school. So the ability to move freely between mainstream and special education facilities with appropriate support at each level is what inclusive special education promotes. So its focus is on the effective inclusion of all children with special schools, of children with special needs in mainstream schools as far as it's appropriate. So we want as many children as possible to be catered for in mainstream schools, but they must have appropriate support. But alongside that would be availability of a continuum of placement options from mainstream classes with support through special classes to special schools to cater for the more severe and children with severe and profound intellectual disability, for example. So this involves ongoing collaboration between teachers in mainstream schools, special schools and classes in order to ensure equitable, quality, appropriate provision and optimum outcomes for all learners. So there we are. There are my references. The first two are the focus on inclusive special education. There's a book that by Springer in 2014, and then the article in the British Journal of Special Ed 2015. Put in my book on parental involvement, because that's a vital part, as you know, of catering properly for children with special needs and disabilities. And the book there with Debbie Greaves on essential evidence-based teaching strategies. That's, I think, a very important book for all levels of education and for students, for teaching students with disabilities and those without. And then I put in an article by Kim Kaufman and myself looking at the philosophy of inclusive vision versus special education reality. Then there's a book I talked about, Inclusive Education at the Crossroads. And then that article, the free article in Education Science is freely available on comparing inclusive education with special education programs. And then finally, there's the one on special education zombies and their consequences. I'm sure you're all going to enjoy reading that. And that's freely available. It's open access. So there we are. That's my presentation. And I look forward to some interesting discussion with you people. Okay.
Thank you very much, Garry, for a very thought-provoking presentation. It is, of course, the purpose of IIRN to bring people from both within India and the wider field to present their ideas. And we know that some of those ideas are going to be provocative, as Gary's work often is. And I think that's important because we live very much in hopefully live and work very much in a spirit of democratic debate. So I'm going to open up the floor now for that debate and ask people to perhaps indicate if they would like to make any comment by putting on their camera and raising their hands for us, please. There's a raising your hand symbol. Any comments about that? Ah, yes, I can see we have something from Sujata. So Sujata in Mumbai, would you like to come in, please? And then I'll bring Rajni in after.
Yes. Thank you, sir. It was a real eye-opener, I would say, and we could relate to it very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
It's a little broken up, Sujata, but can other people please switch their microphones off so that it doesn't break up Sujata's sound? Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So I said your findings, your talk is very much aligned with what our observations are here in India as well, because we have been talking about inclusive education. It is being promoted by our policies, and it is being implemented also in many, many schools across the country. But when we really look at the status of education of these children in these schools, in most places we find that their needs are not really being met. So the question that you have raised is very relevant, that are they really getting their potential fulfilled in a regular school setup, or were they better off in special schools? So, the conclusion that you have drawn, that unless the mainstream schools are ready, first and foremost, when it comes to their attitude, the teachers, their attitude to include them, embrace them, and then learn, have that capacity building to include these children and, not underestimate their potential, that's very, very important. So I just wanted to say that your findings, your observation are definitely what we also completely concur to. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for the feedback.
Thank you very much, Sujata. Rajni, I know you wanted to make a point as well. I'll bring others in. I can see your hands, so I will make sure everybody comes in.
Can we close the screen? There's the screen share. Can we close that, please?
Yeah.
Then we can see each other better.
Hopefully.
No.
What have I got now?
Yeah, just close all your screens down, Gary.
I've closed all that down.
Stop screen share, basically.
Yeah, stop screen share.
Stop screen share. Where's that button?
It would
It
be
says
on
no,
the.
oh,
It would be on the green. It would be on the green button.
There we are.
Yes.
There we are.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
Rajni from Bangalore, would you like to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Professor Hornby. I just wanted to share that I just recently concluded a research study on a large mainstream school, inclusive school in Bangalore. And one of my recommendations actually was the continuum of services that we just spoke about, both within the school and outside the school system, because this school followed, had multiple levels of services within the school, classroom, resource rooms, and smaller one-on-one sessions. So one of my recommendations was continuum of services within. So if a child needs those special education services, pull him out and take him to the resource room. And if we need that he needs, if we think the child needs more specialized services, then take him out to the one-on-one room and then integrate him back into the main classroom for a part of the day. And also for children who need intensive therapy, can we have a continuum of services within the day itself? So I just wanted to share one of my main findings and recommendations in an Indian setup, where one of our biggest challenges is the number of children in the school. And one of the reasons why special education becomes not affordable for many parents is the price factor also. Because the support isn't too much, the grants aren't too much. So how can we have inclusion within a school setting with special ed services within the school setting. Just thought I would share that. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Rajni. Some important points made there, I think. I'll actually make an observation on one or two of these points in a little while, but I want to give everybody else a chance. So, Subha Chandrasekhar, you've had your hand up for a while. Can you switch your microphone on, please, Subha?
Thank you very much, Richard and Dr. Hornby, for all those sharings. Just wanted to give a small background. I've been working as a practitioner promoting inclusion for about 2 decades now. For the last 20 years, I was working with elite schools which had resources and where inclusion could be practiced. And I agree completely with all the evidence-based strategies that you have talked about. Attitudes definitely are one of the most difficult barriers to break through, but I would say that I cannot wait for the attitude to be rectified before I start inclusion. So inclusion, I was working with Delhi Public School Society, which is one of the largest private educational institutions in India, had access to many schools. So collaboration, absolutely, as Dr. Hornby pointed out, between special educators, general education teachers, and parents really achieved a lot of inclusion and breakdown of barriers. In India, as rightly pointed out by Rajni, classroom sizes are huge and general education teachers have a lot to do. When we talk of inclusion, it is like added work for them. So having special educators within the school, and currently in at least urban centers, there are no departments of mental health and inclusion. That's what we are trying to promote now. But we also collaborated with the nearby special schools, which did not have too many resources and access to even things like sports, a large playground field, or even interaction with able-bodied children. So that was also there. And when we could not provide inclusion full-time for severely impacted children, we tried to take our typically developing children to these centers to spend time with them during maybe certain days pre-planned. So inclusion is possible, and special education obviously is also very much important. Our latest policy on education, NEP 2020, in fact, talks about providing both inclusive education as well as special education, where parents can rightly choose what they want to opt out for. So it is very heartening, and it was to see that we are moving in the direction that you are already, talking about. And thank you for your presentation. It was very, what should I say, validating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Professor Janti Narayan has her hand up. If Janti, if you'd like to come in, please.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Professor Hornby, for the wonderful presentation, and also the reactions from all my colleague participants endorsing, and I am also joining them in endorsing what you are saying is absolutely right, and we should be working towards seeing that the best potentials of the children are brought out in the best manner, no matter in what environment it is, at what you are highlighting. And I've always I have been reading your write-up on this ISC, particularly the one that is in education sciences, inclusive vision versus special education reality. It's a very beautifully done one. In fact, I've been sharing it with my friends and telling them, read this, let us not go by the emperor's new clothes concept. Let us look at what is
So sometimes we refer them to a separate center or, a different special school. And And I've always kind of felt guilty about it, and I've questioned myself if this is the right thing to do, because I'm supposed to not be doing this. But today, hearing you, it really is kind of heartening. And I do believe that it's not always possible that full inclusion is really a myth. I do agree to that. And there have also been instances where we have met parents who, while leaving, they might not have been very happy. But when we've met them later, they have come back to us and said that, yes, ma'am, the child is progressing and we are happy. So I think we have to take it with a pinch of salt, and we have to be, ultimately, I think it's the child, and it's a very child specific, case specific decision that we need to take. But at the end of the day, if the child is learning in whichever environment, I think that is most important. Yeah, thank you so much. Just wanted to share this.
Great, thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, Divya. I know there are one or two other people waiting, but I think I've had quite a lot of comments so far from Mumbai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Kolkata, all around India at the moment. So I think it's only fair to give Garry just a few minutes to make any observation he might have related to the comments that he's heard so far.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Yeah, no, I very much appreciate the comments that have been made, and it seems the practical reality is very, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. India is representing the practical reality that we do need to have as much support as possible for kids in mainstream schools, for kids with disabilities, but there are times when there needs to be other arrangements made, as the last speaker said. But I much appreciate the sort of feedback, and myself, I collaborate a lot with James Kaufman in the States, and we feel that we have to present these points of view, because a lot of the mainstream literature now on inclusive education, special education, seems to be promoting this full inclusion. Let's do away with special education. And from the comments that have been made so far, it's quite clear that we cannot do away with special education. We need special education to be high quality, evidence-based, and present in all schools, in mainstream schools and special schools. So it's very reinforcing to me, and I appreciate the feedback. I look forward to hear what other people have been saying. So thanks, Richard.
Okay, we'll have a few more comments, I think, and then we'll move on from there. So Dr. Malti Krishnan back in Bangalore.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much, Richard. Professor Hornby, lovely to listen to you. Inclusive special education. One question that has always been there in my mind is absolute inclusion. Question never goes away from my mind, whether it's possible at all in absolute terms. That's on one aspect. The other thing is my research study has been on social emotional learning. And so when we talk about mainstream schools, special schools, mainstream school teachers and special educators collaborating with one another, I just want to understand where does social and emotional aspect fall into place as far as children are concerned. When we talk about inclusive education not being a possibility completely, where does a parent's role fit in? Where does a school's role fit in terms of development of social and emotional competencies?
Yeah, very important question.
Yeah. Do you want to comment on that, Garry, before we move on?
Yeah, it's absolutely vital, isn't it? It's vital for all children in all schools at all levels, and it's often overlooked, the value. But as we know, the ability to have good interpersonal skills, problem solving, conflict resolution is very much related to success in not only at school, but success in life later on. So, part of special education is promoting the use of social and emotional learning programs. And I think that's one of the contributions that we can make to mainstream schools, to ensure that teachers that have got a class where they may have several kids with disabilities, that social and emotional learning, to things like circle time, I don't know whether that's something people are familiar with, probably is.
Yes.
Circle time, it's used worldwide. It's a simple procedure. That to me is so vital to help children to get on with one another and to relate to adults and to express themselves, and involving parents. I think that parents' involvement in schools with kids generally is so important, but particularly with special needs kids, and different methods of doing that. I mean, one of the things that I've come across very important is student-led parent-teacher conferences. So you have the annual or 3 times a year meeting with parents and teachers. Do it as a student-led parent-teacher conference so that they're all involved. And that's something I'm trying to introduce here in Barbados. I'm sure I don't think there's any schools here which actually use it. New Zealand is quite widely used. But yeah, and then you can define the goals and see how parents can help to support social emotional learning as well as academic learning. So I think there's so much that us as educators know that really benefits kids. And that's where the focus should be, really, not on trying to implement an extreme model of segregation or an extreme model of inclusion. It's implementing a model that incorporates both strategies and focuses on evidence-based teaching strategies, and parental involvement and things like social emotional learning should be a priority.
Okay, I'm conscious of time. There are 1 or 2 things. Sharing these sessions is always a bit of a challenge because I'm trying to keep up with the chat boxes as well as what people are actually putting their hands up for. Although I see Bharti has her hand up as well, but she made a point earlier on which relates to something that Rajni said as well, and we've also had a comment from Sarah Duiswaran, which is about cost situations and the costs of special education. Bharti, would you like to say something about that as you raised it earlier?
Yeah. First of all, sorry, I won't be able to my camera. Bharti here, Richard sir.
Yeah, hello Bharti. Go ahead.
Richard, hope I'm. I just want to know a little bit about student-led parent-teacher meetings. If you can say a few words, a few lines about it, that would give me more clarity about it. Thank you so much.
Okay, Garry, can you say something about that as you brought it up?
Yeah, I describe it in my parent involvement book, and it's also described in the Inclusive Special Education book. Basically, what it is that there's always a big issue when parent-teacher meetings, when parents are called in to talk with teachers about the progress of their kids, and often schools will say, "Oh, we can't get all the parents to be involved." Well, one way to make sure maximum involvement of parents is to get the child to come in and bring their parent in, and the sit down is a 3-way meeting. So the child introduces their parent to their teacher, and then the focus is on the child's work, and the parents and teachers listen to what the child's priorities are, and then the teacher says, well, the areas of concern are, and so the 3 of them work out a program together for the next period. It might be a term or a year, but it's a 3-way interaction. So it's parent, child, and teacher involved in a discussion of planning the parents' goals for the next period. And then that's made it. So it gives it builds relationships between parents and teachers, and it also helps to bring more parents in. But if you look at, just put it into Google, student-led parent-teacher conferences, it's actually a widely used strategy now, and but not widely enough. So yeah, please look it up.
Picking things up in the chat box, actually, Shamila Joyce has made a comment about this, and apparently they are doing student-led parent-teaching meetings at her international school in Bangalore. I don't know, Shamila, did you want to say anything about it?
No, like as Dr. Garry said, in the international schools here in Bangalore, what happens is most of the international schools now have adopted this student-led parent-teacher meeting where the student kind of display what they have learned, what they find it difficult, and what they would like to learn next, as Mr. Garry, sorry, Dr. Garry just suggested. As a matter of fact, when I was working at Inventure Academy and Malika ma'am was the principal, she actually encouraged us to include the student while we are discussing the IEPs as well. So it worked very well. So most international schools here do student-led parent-teacher meeting.
Great, very good.
We have a couple of participants in today's meeting from elsewhere as well, and I don't feel obliged, but I just wonder whether Johan from Sweden has any observations that you'd like to make?
Thank you very much for asking me. It's been very interesting to listen to you, Garry, and to all of your others. I'm coming from a kind of country where we have come quite long when it comes to inclusion, I think. And as you said, Garry, there's no actually evidence that says that an inclusive education system is more better than when you have special teaching schools, early special schools, and so on. But if I can just tell you something, what's happening now in Sweden is that we're going very far from the idea of inclusion. Our politicians have said that we have worked too much towards inclusion. But you have to have in mind that it's a very right-centered or right-wing political agreement. And I think it's very much about the values and their policy in the present government. So I really have difficulty with stating whether we have had inclusion or not. I would say that even when we were further along the road towards inclusion before, we never saw inclusion, we saw integration. Because there was so much still to work with, to have competence, attitudes, resources in place. So we have had quite good integration, but we have never seen inclusion, except for very few schools in the Swedish school system. So I rather look at inclusion and exclusion as being endpoints in a continuum. And we are now moving more towards exclusion because there are many more processes going on in that direction. Thank you.
Interesting. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Johan, for that. And I know that we have Bhavana as well, who's working in Dubai. I don't know whether you have anything you wanted to say, particularly Bhavana.
Good evening, panelists. Good evening, everyone. I'm Bhavana from Dubai. I'm pursuing my PhD from University of Northampton under the guidance of Richard. I quite agree with the same fact that full inclusion, it is possible when the policy is enforced. Here it is enforced. There's no, like what I said, there are very limited special schools. But schools within them have an integration unit. Like there is full inclusion for children who have mild, moderate disabilities with or without learning support assistance. And then there is a unit for the children who need that individual, very unique and specialized support and needs. So for them, they follow a very limited aspect of the mainstream curriculum, but more into NIOS and alternative curriculum like ASDAN. So I think a good balance of both would be helpful. Yes, and that is when they get the social emotional interaction, social emotional well-being is also taken care because they are not in a separate center or place, so to say. So I feel this is one way forward. However, yes, parents, when they think when it is a mainstream school, these children should be in the mainstream class with everybody else. So I think it's parents' understanding and acceptance of the limitations will also help in this process. So that's my point of view.
Right. I'm just thinking, I'm looking at the time. I mean, I think we could go on discussing these issues forever. And it's been really good to have such good participation from people today. And thank you for those who I've brought in who didn't put their hands up, but have made interesting comments on the chat board. I've been trying to keep up to date with the chat board. I think we've had a pretty good discussion here. And just to remind everybody that this discussion can continue because the materials will be available to everybody and you can come back through IIRN and make points whenever you wish. So well done for everybody for contributing today. But I think, we're coming towards the end of the session and I want to hand over to Rajesh in a while to make a couple of comments about other plans that we have in the offing for IIRN. But perhaps I can conclude by just saying thank you very much to Professor Garry Hornby. As always, Garry, you stimulated tremendous interest in what you've had to say. You've never steered away from issues that maybe other people don't wish to debate. So well done for that. And well done also, I think, for giving us pointers towards some interesting literature, which I'm sure some people will follow up on. So Garry, thank you very much. I'm not sure what time it is there in Barbados, but I know trying to do these things across various time zones is always challenging.
Yeah, Richard, it's worked quite well time wise. It's now 8:30 is it? 10:30 in the morning. But I've really enjoyed being involved and hearing from everybody, and it's sort of reinforced my views that we really need to focus on providing the best possible education for kids with disabilities in whatever setting they are in, and with the goal of helping as many children as possible to be as included as possible in society when they leave school. And our focus needs to be on providing evidence-based strategies for teaching and parental involvement and for social emotional learning in a range of sort of settings. And that's what, for me, has come out of this session. So I've really enjoyed being involved, and congratulations in having such a useful network to share ideas, and may it long continue.
Thank you, Garry. So I'd just like to add as well, we've had more than 40 people at today's session. I think about 45 was the maximum we've had at this session today. And for people in India, I know this is Friday evening, the start of a weekend after a busy working week. So the commitment that you're all showing, I think, is immense. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to hand over to Rajesh. And Rajesh, perhaps you can just make a couple of observations on the program moving forward, because we do run these monthly sessions and hopefully they're going to go from strength to strength. And incidentally, if there's anybody out there who's anxious to provide us with a session and discuss their research, we'd be very pleased to accommodate that. But I think, Rajesh, it would also be worth saying something about next September's conference. So I'll hand back over to Rajesh and say thank you very much for everybody for a great session today.
Thank you, Richard, sir. Thank you very much, Professor Garry, for a wonderful session. I'm also thankful that Johan, sir, joined from Sweden, and we had many participants. I think it is 47 At one time we saw 50, I think so. So the first time we are going with 50. So that's congratulations to the entire IIRN members who are there today on the webinar. Two information. One is we'll be having the next webinar on 19th of January. We thought of keeping it the next week, but since there will be Republic Day and other functions, so many of us will be busy. So we have kept it on 19th of January 2024. The second one is we have already prepared the draft for the Sankalp Trust along with India Inclusion Research Network, presenting the Neurodiversity Matters, a conference on inclusion and empowerment, that is on the 21st and 22nd September 2024. We'll be launching the first flyer by, I think, first week of January, so that you just can look on and book your dates. And we'll be having a lot of speakers. And again, we'll be having a small inaugural part of thing, or officially launching in a physical mode, the India Inclusion Research Network. So that is from me. I think thank you, Professor Richard sir, Jayanti ma'am, and all the other members. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really delighted to have so many people today attending Professor Garry's session. Thank you so much. And wish you all a very happy New Year, a very happy Christmas. Stay safe, keep healthy. Best wishes.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Okay.